Thank you, Amanda. And if you didn't recognize me, I was the one that Dr. Archer called out in the middle of her presentation today for turning my name tag around, which I really didn't do, but she said I did. I thought that was hilarious. So that's me. Welcome. I'm really excited. There's this many people ready to like talk about data at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, last session of the day. I mean, that's dedication right there. Amanda did ask me if I created these signs around the room, and I said no, but welcome. We're very excited that you're here. As any good educator would do, I was making tweaks up until the last second to this presentation. So what is uploaded on the like event page where you can pull session materials isn't the most up to date. So I'm going to give you the most up to date right now. I mean, feel free to pull that PDF off as needed, but the bit.ly that is up here on the screen or the QR code that's in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen will get you to the most up-to-date live version of our presentation. So I'll give you a couple of seconds to pull that up. We are going to engage in a Mentimeter. You certainly don't need to have your laptops for that. As long as you have a mobile device or your laptop, whichever you would prefer, we'll just have you. There's only one quick question for that. We will be spending probably about half of the time, I'm hoping a little bit more, diving into what Amanda and I are kind of calling a case study. So we are going to form about 4 groups. So don't get too comfortable with where you're sitting. We're going to have you move in a little bit, but I'll give you like 30 minutes of lead time for that before we do that. Does anybody need me to leave this up for another couple seconds? Oh, that's fun. Okay, well, if you can't pull it up on your computer and you can pull it up on your phone, then I will make sure I can get it to Amanda and we can upload it, the most up-to-date version. It's not like super different, but I was making like subtle tweaks. So you're certainly welcome to pull up the slide deck on the event page as well. So don't stress out if you can't pull up the most up-to-date version. All right, let's see if this is going to work. I might need to stand closer to it. Maybe, maybe not. Oh, maybe. There we go. There's the mug shot we were all looking for. My name is Charlie Travato. I'm the director of curriculum for the Conewago Valley School District. It's in South Central PA in Adams County, right outside of Gettysburg. Fun fact, the Conewago Valley School District is the largest school district in Adams County. Folks that are not from Adams County sometimes think that Gettysburg is the largest school district in Adams County, but we actually surpassed them. We have about 4,000 students, K to 12, 5 buildings, and within our high school is a comprehensive career and technology center as well. So very thankful and blessed to work there with my colleagues. I rarely use Twitter, but I think it's a cute, fun Twitter handle. My students, like way back when I was in the classroom, I taught secondary math. They helped me create that Twitter handle. So I've just kind of carried it through, and every now and again, I'll retweet something. But if you need to get in touch with me or need anything after this presentation, please don't be a stranger. My CV Colonials email is up here as well. And as humble as she is when she introduced me, she's also my partner in crime. We typically get the band back together every now and again, and she loves when I say that. But Amanda Sapola is my ride or die when it comes to this kind of stuff. We've had a very interesting journey together. We worked together for multiple years in Berks County when she was an assistant superintendent and I was working at the IU. And then we kind of like split and went our separate ways. And she came to Patton. Well, she stayed an assistant superintendent. I went to another IU, and then she ended up going to coming to Patton, and I went back into a district. But we've never lost touch. We've always stayed in touch. We've always collaborated on things. So we're excited that Amanda's here. Very thankful to have her as a colleague and a friend. And she is out of the Patton East office in Malvern. Also, ride or die. I'm good. Okay, there she is, Amanda Sapola. She's here as the sidekick. Okay. It's her experience that she brings to the table, which is good. So there's a couple of things that I'm hoping that you all take away from today. The first one, I am going to share a little bit about PVAAS and eMetric, just to show of hands. How many of you have heard of PVAAS? Great. Love the fact that we're in roster verification right now. It's fantastic. My phase starts tomorrow. I'm so excited. Um, total joke, but okay. It's interesting, but here we are. It's very important, though. We talk about data governance, and I had to actually educate my teaching staff that has rosters, and for some of them have multiple rosters. And it was really interesting educating them this year, because it's like one of the first times that for quite a number of them, it is going to count again, right? Since COVID. So it was interesting kind of like getting them back into the swing of things, and doing it from a district lens was very interesting versus doing it from a consulting lens at an IU. But I digress. So PVAAS, anybody here of eMetric or have used eMetric? Yes, that's good. Okay. So we're going to take a look at some eMetric stuff today. But what I'm hoping you walk away with today is feeling a little bit more comfortable engaging with PVAAS, which is our data set for all of our growth in the state for our tested subject areas, and eMetric, which is a free data warehouse for all of our state assessments from an achievement perspective. So anything related to PSSAs, keystones, the PASA, and now the WIDA access test. It's actually every district, every school building has a free data warehouse kind of management site where all this is housed, which is pretty interesting. So if you are new to it or have never heard of it before, you can go back and talk to your superintendent, assistant superintendent, possibly building principal, and they should hopefully have an idea of what this is and how to get you a free account. So we'll take a look at some data sets. We'll talk about how to use both PVAAS and eMetric data to inform our secondary literacy program decisions. And I'm going to give you some time to actually take a look at a school, a redacted school that I kind of put together for you all, that looks at PVAAS and eMetric data sets, along with a couple of screenshots from Future Ready to start to come up with some possible root causes. Like, you're not going to know the school. I'm not going to tell you what the school is, but I want you to actually engage with the data to see, what are some of the different processes or demographic questions that we might want to ask. I'm not asking you to solve the world's problems for this school, but just some things to start to think about and start to put pen to paper today. So I'd like you to just take a couple of seconds. If you can think of one or two adjectives that describe your best self as a learner today, I'll give you like 5 to 7 seconds just to think, and then I'd like you to turn to your partner. If you have a partner at your table, if you don't, flip around if you're by yourself to the to the nearest table, and just share what your 2 adjectives are as a learner for today. 5 to 7 seconds. And feel free in turn to talk to your partner and share your adjectives. Okay. Signature afterwards. Any interesting adjectives that we heard from our partners today? I know this is the last session of the day. I can tell you I'm engaged. That's me. I'm curious. Those are usually my 2 that I go to. Yes, ma'am. Good. Great. Good stuff. Excitement. We're good. Anybody else? Yep. Absolutely. There's been so much emphasis over the last few years in the state of Pennsylvania. I think we've gotten to we've kind of jumped on the science of reading bandwagon late. We've probably all have heard that in the state of Pennsylvania. That doesn't mean we're last, but we jumped late into kind of the research game and really taking a good hard look at research and tapping into organizations like Patent or IU Systems that are really invested in this work and have been invested in this work for a very long time. It's not that we jumping on this kind of science of reading bandwagon later than other states doesn't mean that we are performing any malpractice to our students, right? We hear kind of this balanced literacy versus science of reading approach. And I think we've done a really good job at focusing, really laser focusing at the elementary level, especially in our district. We've spent so much time and money and effort and training and support of our teachers and tears for a lot of folks, especially our reading interventionists, but a lot of tears, a lot of stress and anxiety, a lot of kind of calming those waters at the elementary level that I feel like we sometimes neglect the secondary. So it's really good that this kind of conference has been set up to bring more awareness and attention to how to support structured literacy at the secondary level, because we can't intervene ourselves out of a problem. And as I'm kind of taking our buildings through the MTSS process and really focusing on tier 1 instruction, especially for ELA, like a lot of our schools are really going to be hyper focused in on ELA over the next couple of years, as they have been, but in a more structured and systematic way. We can't intervene ourselves out of a problem. We really need to look hard and fast at the core instruction and curriculum that we're doing at the tier 1 level before we can jump to talking about intervention. But my hope is, and the way that this would work or should work, is as we intervene with our students from an early intervention standpoint at the elementary, there should be less emphasis and need over time. Once we get to the secondary level, we're always going to have struggling readers. That's never going to go away. But the hope is if we can focus on that early intervention piece at the elementary, which is where a lot of our focus has been, that over the next 10, 15, 20 years, it's not going to happen overnight, but we should see that kind of gradual release of the number of kids that need and require intervention at the secondary level. At a pretty egregious number, right? We want to minimize that as much as we can. So I'm excited, long story short, that we're here and we're engaging in some secondary conversations. So we're talking today about data, and I'm going to kind of fly through some of the overview pieces because I did see a lot of people's hands went up when I said PVAAS. I don't want to spend a ton of time PVAASing you out and giving you information about PVAAS that you might not need, but I think it's important to level set and have a common language, especially when you go in and start looking at some data in certain table groups. But why is data so important? This is one of my favorite quotes about data, but without data, you're just another person with an opinion, right? We need to look at both quantitative data, that's kind of your hard and fast your numerical pieces, right? Or maybe even some quantitative survey data, but then you also have your qualitative data as well, which is you can pull maybe some more subjective pieces out of qualitative data, but you need to have this kind of healthy balance between the two. You need something to go back to that isn't just you standing up there or me standing up here saying, well, I know this because I think of this, or I think of this because of this. So you really need to kind of ground yourself in pulling some of that data together and taking both a subjective and an objective approach when you're taking a look at your data. So it's so important because all the 3 pictures that are up here on the screen really give us an opportunity to reground ourselves in why we do what we do every single day. For many of our systems, I don't know how many of you have ever experienced the drip methodology when it comes to data, but data rich, information poor. Some of us are probably collecting data for the sake of collecting data and not really doing anything with the data. Or we might have an assessment calendar that's been built and we're assessing our students to death. And we're just like, what are we doing with all this data, right? How are we using it to help support our PLCs or other grade level team meetings or overall system wide practices? We want to get away from that. There's a reason why we're assessing our kids, and we're taking time from instruction to assess our kids. And that could be to help prescriptively come up with something for a child, right? When it comes to an intervention or it comes to helping support an English learner, or it's going to help to support a gifted student or a student receiving special services. Or it might be data that's going to help more with honing in on and giving that global look at what impacts to tier one instruction do we need to be looking at. So data is important because it really can help us systematize the work that we're doing. It shouldn't just be another thing that we do to check a box to say we've met this requirement on an assessment calendar, but it's actually giving us that good, solid look at what is going on. So I'm interested to hear from you all, and this is one question Mentimeter, but what data are you currently using to inform your secondary program decisions? So there is a QR code up here in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. It should hopefully, fingers crossed, bring you to a Mentimeter. And it's literally this question. And all I'm looking is the data that you're collecting right now. So if you're using IXL, you would put in IXL. If you're using AIMSweb, you're putting in AIMSweb. If you're observation data, you're putting in observation data. But what data are you currently using that's going to help to inform your secondary program decisions back in your districts? This is just to help us kind of level set here. Data are you currently using? Anybody still need the QR code? Go back to that. A couple seconds. We were seeing some PSSAs, especially if we're talking maybe an upper intermediate / middle school. We might see some CDTs come in there. That's usually a good data set for us to pull from. Oh, there's the 31 responses we were looking for. We went from 4 to 31 in what, 30 seconds? That's great. Common assessments, teacher input. I'm seeing the maze is up there. MAP, there are some schools that are using that. Acadience, PVAAS, our growth assessment, any common assessments that are in there. So this is good. We have some good stuff in here. Teacher input, PSSAs, CDTs look like they're the biggest ones or the most common between all of us, and that's not a problem. But we're using something, right? We're using some type of data to help support the work that we're doing in making programmatic decisions when it comes to secondary literacy programs. So as we kind of go through this data journey, you're going to be given this set of data that seems like it's either all over the place or it's so much in just kind of one pile, and now you got to work on kind of organizing it to get all the way down to this piece in the bottom right hand corner where we're actually using it or we're being actionable with our data. I put up the Lego piece because we're like super into Legos right now at home. I have a 7-year-old and I'm either stepping on Legos, my wife's vacuuming Legos up. Like it's a Lego nightmare. So we're hoping that we kind of go from this pile of data to sorting it and arranging it, presenting it in a way that's going to kind of tell a story, to then giving us something to leverage to say, let's be actionable with the data that we're going to actually be presented with. So like I said, I'm not going to sit here and PVAAS you to death, but I think that we need to have some common language when it comes to PVAAS and what the power of PVAAS can bring to our secondary literacy program decisions. So PVAAS in a nutshell takes all of our state assessment data and pops out two looks. We're either looking back to evaluate the effectiveness of our school and our district, or even maybe our teachers. And we're also using it to look ahead, right? To plan for or project out to what our upcoming student needs potentially are. So whenever we're using PVAAS to help us with this kind of data analysis, we're looking at it through two different lenses. We have reports that kind of give us that historical look where we're looking back in that rearview mirror. And then we also are kind of looking ahead to plan for and be purposeful about our projections to upcoming assessments. So one of the best quotes when it comes to value-added analysis, like SAS EVAS didn't come up with the value-added analyses, but it's a method of analyzing student test data to determine student growth by comparing apples to apples. So we are comparing our current students to themselves. And that's probably one of the biggest misconceptions that I've had to debunk over time as a consultant in the IU system, going out and working with schools and working with charter schools, that PVAAS isn't taking our current cohort and comparing it to last year's cohort. We can make those comparisons visually by looking at reports, but the actual statistics behind PVAAS is taking the current students and comparing them to themselves. So you have a fair comparison from year to year or student to student. We heard a lot about effect sizes. Like I was just in a session in this room next door that talked about effect sizes. Effect sizes are great. We can certainly spend an hour talking about effect sizes versus value added. But effect sizes are something a little bit different than what value added is measuring, right? Value added is measuring, did we take a student group and kind of maintain status quo with them over that school year? Do we take a student group and grow them over time where they entered at a specific achievement level and exited higher as a group? Or do we take that group of students at a certain entering achievement level, and by the time they exited the school year, did they fall behind, right? Did they not end as academically proficient or academically achieve, or they might not be achieving at the same level that they came into the school year achieving? So we kind of already talked about the comparisons piece. So this is just your visual on that. And I just have some information in here about achievement versus growth comparison. I'm not going to sit here and read the table, but this is more kind of information based as you're kind of taking some of this information back and sharing it maybe with grade level PLCs, building administration, district administration, et cetera. Just the difference between achievement versus growth, right? That achievement piece in a nutshell is giving you that snapshot in time based on what students should or hopefully learned over the course of the year. If we're thinking about PSSAs and keystones, growth is really looking at, did we maintain achievement? Did we gain ground? Or did we lose ground? So a couple of different reports that we can pull, and I have some snapshots of what this is going to look like on our case study, but our value added report is going to tell you how is our programming working for students in general. So we can look at this through the all student group lens. So how is what we're doing? How did it impact our students, right? Did we maintain, gain, or fall behind? And we can also look at it through different subgroups of kids, right? So we can look at this through students who are Hispanic students. So how did we do at impacting our Hispanic students, or how did we do it impacting our students receiving special education services, or students who might be receiving Title I services, if our middle school is identified as a Title I school, those types of things. Diagnostic is getting a little bit more granular and saying, how's our program working for different types of students? So this is looking at different achievement groups of kids. So our really high achieving kids versus our really low achieving kids in the state that we roster in our building. Or we can look at it through the lens of that demographic subgroup as well. Regardless of where students are entering, when we're looking at our data on PVAAS, if any of our kids are showing up in our student groups as being in the yellow or the red, meaning they're slipping, they're falling behind, they entered at a certain achievement level, regardless if they're high, average, or low, and they slipped. They didn't at least maintain kind of that status quo in terms of their achievement. So regardless if we have kids that are higher achieving, average achieving, or lower achieving, we shouldn't be losing ground academically for them. So that might like turn a little red flag on when we're starting to look at our PVAAS value added reporting. Regardless of the entering achievement group, right, high, medium, or low, a reasonable goal would be that we at least maintain the academic achievement of our student group. So in other words, if we come in high, we should hopefully leave high. If we come in average, we should hopefully leave average. Now, the last one's a little interesting. We come in low, do we want to maintain low? Right? Like that's usually where I throw that out there, and some are like, ew, that kind of sounds weird. Like, are we okay with green being the color that we see for all of our different types of achievement groups? And sometimes that last one like kind of like irks us when we say that, because we're not okay with a group of kids historically coming in lower and then maintaining low achievement, right? Now, is the expectation that we take those kids and grow them at least one full academic year? Absolutely. We're maintaining the achievement of that group of kids, but that might not be enough for some of our students. And some of you might be servicing kids that are historically lower achieving. That's not a bad thing, but that just might be the reality of the district or the building or the class that you're supporting. But regardless of the group, high, medium, or low, all students have the opportunity and can exceed their achievement standard. So in other words, all students can exceed the standard for growth. So if we see a dark blue or a light blue color show up on our value added report, that means that our kids came in at a certain level and they left higher. That doesn't mean our lower achieving kids automatically become the high achieving kids, but there was something that happened in the learning environment that we might have to dissect that says, wow, we might want to consider doing that again for this level or type of learner in the future. So I just kind of shared a little bit about what can PVAAS do for you. So I'm not going to sit here and read all these bullet points, but the biggest piece I really want to highlight is that third bullet. It allows for system level or teacher level reflection on the value add of students. So what is it that's within our locus of control as educators? So I just shared a little bit about some of the key reports. And again, you're going to dig into analyzing some of these color-wise. So I'm not going to sit here and explain every single picture. I just wanted to give you a snapshot of what they look like and what you're going to see kind of in your case study. But you have your value added report. So this can give you a full report on literacy. So whether it's 7th grade PSSA, 8th grade PSSA, Keystone Literature, we can be looking at our teacher value added report. So anybody that roster students in those tested subject areas or grade levels or courses, you can take a look at your individual teacher value added report. You can also look at your diagnostic report as well, right? Your low, medium, and high group, and what was your overall impact growth wise on those students. We can also take a look at some grade level projections. So we can take a look at our students that are currently enrolled in grade levels and where are they projected to when it comes to our secondary literacy grade levels or courses. And then there's also some diagnostic reports as well. So you can take a look and see, I don't know how many of you remember seeing that launch pad that had all the like pie charts on it. I'm very upset that they took that away. I'm just going to say that, but there is like a workaround. So if you want to know the secret workaround to it, you can see me at the end, but that bottom, that middle center bottom picture is actually a snapshot of how you can get that workaround back for your pie charts. There are some protocols that the state team, phenomenal people, folks at the state level have created that as you're kind of doing a deeper analysis of maybe even some of the root cause in your programs might be really helpful for you. The Digging Deeper guides, hands down, one of the best things that I've ever come across in my career as an educator in Pennsylvania. There are so many amazing systems and teacher level questions that you can look at concerning curriculum, instruction, assessment, or even just the overall organization of the classroom or organization of the schedule if you're talking systems level as well. Just some really good, solid questions to help you kind of analyze the ins and outs of, maybe what could potentially be a root cause for why am I seeing what I'm seeing in my system when it comes to literacy. There is a specific ELA guide that you would want to reference in there. There's also a guide, especially if you're in a district or in a classroom that's supporting higher achieving kids. And there's also a guide that can help you support students that are historically lower achieving students as well. So just some things to think about, like this is more of a rhetorical, like just generative question for you to think about, but how is your system currently leveraging PVAAS to inform your secondary program decisions? You might be sitting here going, I had no idea that this even existed. And now I know that I can, grab my login, or if you don't even know what your login is, I can help you with that too. Get in there and start to dig or like poke around and see some things in terms of your reports. What is my projection report? Or you might be sitting there going, yeah, I've been in PVAAS a million bazillion times, but now I'm walking away with an extra report that I could potentially be taking a look at. So the last thing that I want to share is about eMetric, and I saw the fewest hands go up with this one, and I kind of mentioned what eMetric is. It is a free platform that provides online assessment reporting through data interaction. So you can get things like reports or graphs, you can disaggregate. There are definitely drill downs where you can look very granularly at reporting categories and assessment anchors, especially for the students that test the PSSAs. I will say eMetric is way more robust for students that test the PSSA, where you can actually drill down and see like what percentage of possible points did my students receive on just TDAs. Like I know that's a big piece when we're making programmatic decisions about our secondary literacy programs. Like how are our kids actually doing on TDAs? And I know that's been a big push over the last couple of years in the state, is to help to support our 500 school districts and charter schools with text dependent analysis. So I just kind of shared a little bit about the different key reports that are here. And you can see, I mentioned before, PSSAs, Keystones, the PASA, and then your access assessments. But what is available? So there's a couple of different reports. The biggest reports to think about are, you can obviously generate your performance levels. So taking a look to see what percentage of students are at or above proficiency, what percentage of students received a basic, what percentage of students received proficient, et cetera. And then the other piece that I would suggest, especially for PSSA, is taking a deeper dive into those assessment anchor reports. You can do that for the Keystone. What I will say is the Keystone doesn't break it down as far from an assessment anchor perspective as the PSSA does. You can still generate an assessment anchor report on eMetric for the Keystones. It's just not going to be as robust as some of the graphs that we're going to take a look at this afternoon. So I'm just giving you some sample kind of reports that you can see. This is a mean percentage correct. So you can kind of see, and I don't know why this little thing's not working, but all of the assessment anchors and reporting categories for this one graph in eMetric, for example, is kind of along this vertical axis. And then you have the mean percentage correct for that cohort of students that tested. So for example, if I'm taking a look at this fourth grade standard, or this fourth grade reporting category, E4D, right? I think that's vocabulary acquisition and use, if I remember correctly. Isn't that sick that I know that? But in that particular reporting category, I can see here that my students that tested earned almost 52% of the total possible points available to them on that assessment. So while that might not be the most egregious area that I need to focus on, it's definitely one of the lowest for this group, one of the lowest mean percentage correct reporting categories that I might want to focus on. So I mentioned the reporting categories and assessment anchors. So you can look at this for your whole student, but you can also drill down and disaggregate it. You can disaggregate by gender. So that's really interesting data, especially in literacy, looking at your male versus females and what mean percentage points correct they got for their reporting categories or assessment anchor. You can look at ability and you can look at your racial subgroups as well. There's also some other like super crazy graphs that you can create through data tools that actually plot out for you, like some of the statistical pieces to see what questions, or you can kind of compare, how did students do? Like, what was the correlation between how students performed on one assessment anchor versus the other? So we're not going to like deep dive into that today. That's like round 2. And I would never do that to you in the afternoon after being in sessions all day. I promise. That's totally a morning session. But you can create some like crazy correlational graphs, which is a newer feature since COVID, that not a lot of people have actually dug into to see like some of the correlation between. You can even do like an ELA assessment anchor and a math assessment anchor. So it's always really interesting to do this for TDA. Like, what's the correlation between how students performed on their TDA assessment anchor and versus an open-ended problem or an open-ended set of questions on their math assessment at the same time. So very interesting data to take a look at. So again, more of like a rhetorical question to think about, because we're going to actually dig into the case study this afternoon. But how are you addressing those possible disproportionalities amongst your students? So I mentioned you can disaggregate by gender, ability, or even racial subgroups. So as you start doing that and kind of taking this back and putting it into practice and analyzing some of your data, you might see some disproportionalities like, wow, I'm split half and half in my population. Most districts are male versus female, but I'm noticing my female students are way outperforming my male students when it comes to TDA. Like, what is that? Maybe I need to dig into that a little bit more, because there is a glaring disproportion in amongst my gender subgroups. So I wanted to share just kind of on that TDA eligible content kind of notion. What I did with our team in the past is I looked at that kind of transitional moment from elementary to secondary. And our 6th grade is housed in our intermediate school right now, but I kind of consider them still in that secondary lens. But I looked at the eligible content, like I drilled down to the most specific pieces that are going to help support instruction with TDA. And I put the 5th grade eligible content next to the 6th grade eligible content, and I started to map them together. And it was really interesting when I did this and I showed this to our teachers, because everything in those text boxes on the 6th grade side is something in addition or something to the next level, right? Or at more rigor or depth and complexity that students needed to be able to do transitioning from elementary to secondary. So something even as simple as looking at putting your eligible content codes side by side can really help to give you more. It can really help to shed some more light into maybe some of the decisions that you're making in terms of maybe structured professional development, or maybe even at the root of what's happening in the classroom, right? Like, how can we best inform that transition from elementary to secondary in the classroom? And I just did this with TDA because this is like the big thing over the last couple of years. But you can really do this with, informational text. You can do it with craft and structure. You can do it with vocabulary, et cetera. I just kind of picked TDA here just to show that there are some overlaps between the eligible content code and even some of the vocabulary words that are used to structure those eligible content codes and those expectations for mastery. But then there's also some in addition or at a higher level of rigor that we might want to just kind of take a look at. So what I want to do is spend the rest of the time having you kind of dig into some data. So I gave you a sample case study. And again, you're welcome. This should be the same one that's on the event page. So if you pulled up like that static PDF on the event page, the link should still take you to our case study and you should be good to go. But I'm going to ask you, there's actually 4 questions, and they're all kind of centered around Bernhardt's work for continuous school improvement and her work with data. But there's 4 data types. There's demographic data, student learning data, processing data, and perception data. I didn't dig into all of those today, but there are questions when you actually intersect. There's a lot of intersectionality between these particular data sets that actually give you some really good questions, like question prompts to start thinking about. Here's my data set. If I'm looking at my data set and I have demographic data and perception data, for example, what question should I be possibly asking when it comes to us kind of looking at our overall data? So if I have demographic data and I have perceptual data, I might be looking at those data sets and asking this question: what groups of students might be experiencing school differently? Right? We might have some perceptions in there, but then we're also taking a look to see, maybe our Hispanic students are looking at our ELA program a little bit differently than maybe our white students, or maybe our Title I students might be looking at our ELA program a little bit differently than our non-Title I students. So when you start to intersect the different types of data that you possibly have available in your system, and in one way, shape, or form, you more than likely have all of these over time that have either been compiled or surveyed or something. But when you start intersecting them together, these are kind of your generic questions you want to start thinking about or using as a lens to help focus what your potential root cause could be. So we're going to have 4 different kind of groups that are going to happen. So I'm going to ask us to just kind of reorganize into 4 different groups. And if we don't come up with the actual answer or potential answer to the questions today, that's okay. This is really more about exploration and just kind of starting to look at some of the data sets this afternoon. But I really want you to start to discuss in your groups, like, what are you noticing about the data that's in this case study, right? Like, we're going to click through this data snapshot. There's going to be a lot of data in here for us to take a look at. But I want you to just start thinking about, what are you noticing when we're comparing our 2 different groups of students? The groups of students that we're looking at are the all student group. And then I disaggregated and gave you data for students who have an IEP. So if you're taking a look at this first section up here at your performance levels for students that are at or above proficiency, that top bar on every single one of the screenshots is your all student group. And the bottom bar, the shorter bar, is your students who were classified as having an IEP in this grade level. So it's going to be a lot to kind of take in and take a look at. But as we start to dig into some of the data that we're seeing, like, you can see some of the PVAAS pieces in here, which is really interesting. I even threw some future ready in here, projection data. Like, I'm really more interested in you just kind of like talking through and maybe even jotting down, what are you noticing? What are some of your observations? What are some of the strengths that you're seeing within the data? Like, maybe there's a reporting category that kids are doing really well in. And then, do we see any areas of opportunity and growth? That's probably going to take us to the end today. If you're like super overachievers, and I just kind of shared a little bit about Bernhardt's work, there are some questions below. If you want to start to think through, like, what are you trying to, or what are you able to extract from the data, from your strengths, from your growth opportunities, and you're seeing something like, how is student access different in programs and processes? Maybe what might be a question that you might want to structure? Like, how can we get a little bit more granular with that? So maybe it is something about, how are our students who are receiving special education services approaching or have access to intervention? It could be something as simple as that, but it's getting a little bit more granular and giving a little bit more meat compared to what student groups we're taking a look at. If we don't get to the Bernhardt stuff just for time, totally okay. I'm more interested in having you kind of just talk through the data, analyzing the data sets, and just having a conversation about them. What are you noticing? What are you wondering type thing. So I will ask us to maybe just kind of regroup, and maybe we'll do like maybe a group, these two tables in the back over here will be a group. Maybe we'll put these two tables together, these tables up here, this group over here, something like that. I'll just kind of, we're all adults. We can reorganize ourselves, but I'll come around if you have questions or you need help accessing anything, but feel free to just start to kind of look through some of the data and just start to ask some of the questions. What are you noticing again? What are you wondering type thing? And then we'll kind of end. So happy data mining. Amanda and I will be around if there are questions or concerns that pop up. But it's not as tight as I want it to be. And now we have a full continuum of K-5 reading interventionists. We didn't have, this was our first year where we were fully staffed K-5 with our intervention, and we weren't. So was a learning year, a lot of growth for us, but we can only go up. All right, folks. So we have about 2 minutes left. Really good conversation. Again, very impressed that you were engaged in looking at data sets. What I can share with you all is like this document, this data snapshot, like case study. This is a process that I usually take folks through, whether I was training them in the past or I'm now working in a specific school district. This is a very quick kind of 3-step organizational and process focused snapshot for data analysis. So you are welcome anytime to make a copy of this document and delete out all of my screenshots and put your own screenshots in. Like if you're looking at like hitting the ground running with the PLC next year to really analyze your new PSSA data or your new Keystone data from this previous year's cohort, like this, you can use this kind of snapshot to, again, delete all of my screenshots and put your own screenshots in. Like it's a great place to just kind of organize and house everything. So feel free to do that. Did anybody solve the problems of the world with this school district? Anybody notice anything real interesting about this school district? They're all student group. It's very interesting. Yep. Now, did anybody pick up that their projections for achievement were low, but their growth is high? Right? Like that's really interesting. So they focus more on growth versus achievement, which is very interesting, right? Like some of our kids, I'm going to rip the Band-Aid off and say they might never reach proficiency, right? And we have to be okay with that. But if they're not going to reach proficiency, are we doing what we can do to get them closer to reaching proficiency, right? So the focus for this school has really been on growing our kids versus getting them to the proficiency line, like giving them a good shot over their 13-year career in our district to get to hopefully proficiency or inch closer to proficiency. Anything else interesting that you noticed?
Generally speaking,
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. That's a really, really good point. And you're going to be faced with that. You're going to say, oh my gosh, I have all this achievement data and I have all this growth data and I have all this benchmark data and I have all this diagnostic data. Like, what am I going to do with it? Right. And if the focus is on adjusting things systematically, like your processes at a systems level, we need to look back to see what was and what wasn't working for multiple cohorts of kids. And then if you're trying to impact the now, that's really where you want to focus on that benchmark and diagnostic data, right? What's working for all kids? What percentage of kids are on level? And then what is it prescriptively that we can be supporting our kids with from a diagnostic lens?
A good starting point when you're looking at PVAAS data is if you have more than 50% of your students who are not achieving, that's a really big indicator that you need tier one. Like you need to address your tier one. So like Charlie was saying early on, if you can't intervene out of a tier one problem. So if you're looking at like more than 50% of our students are not making growth or are not achieving, you really need to look at what's happening in tier one because you're not going to get out of that.
Yeah, I was getting the Academy Awards red light blinked at me. So I think we're done. Thanks for being awesome participants and looking at data for an hour with me. I really appreciate it. I'll stick around if you have questions, but I hope everybody got something out of the conference today. It was awesome being here. Learned a lot of really good stuff. It was great to focus on secondary. So have a great summer. Please rest, refresh, have a couple of drinks, do what you got to do as an adult to recharge over the summer. Have a good one.